December 1944, Stalag Luft III, deep in occupied Poland. A German guard leans against the wire, cigarette smoke curling into the freezing air. He watches the American prisoners shuffle past, gaunt faces, hollow eyes, boots wrapped in rags. He smiles. Americana, he mutters. So proud. Now look at them. For months, he's watched these men grow weaker, watched their uniforms hang looser, watched the fights break out over stale bread crusts. To him, they are already broken, already beaten, just bodies waiting for the war to end. Then, a truck rolls through the gate, wooden crates stamped with a red cross, dozens of them. The guard doesn't think much of it at first, just supplies, paperwork, bureaucracy from Geneva, but he watches the prisoners' faces change. Not relief, something sharper, something he doesn't expect. Discipline. Within minutes, men who looked half dead are organizing lines, assigning roles, rationing contents down to the ounce. The guard realizes, with a cold unease creeping up his spine, that he is not looking at broken men. He is looking at a system. And somewhere behind that system, men who refuse to die quietly. This is the story of how a cardboard box became more valuable than gold, and how it was almost never delivered at all. To understand why a simple package meant so much, you have to understand what starvation actually does to a man. German POW rations, under the Geneva Convention, were supposed to match what German reserve troops received. On paper, this sounded fair. In reality, it was a lie. By 1943, Germany itself was starving. Allied bombing had shattered supply lines. Farms lay fallow. Food that should have gone to prisoners went to soldiers on the Eastern Front instead. Camp rations shrank to watery soup, a few potatoes, and bread cut with sawdust to stretch the flour further. Men lost 20, 30, 40 pounds. Their gums bled, their teeth loosened. They stopped sweating, stopped healing from small wounds. Winter cold that should have been survivable became lethal, because starving bodies can't generate heat. Disease spread fast in these conditions. Dysentery, tuberculosis, frostbite that turned to gangrene in men too weak to fight infection. And here's the cruelest part. The Red Cross packages that were supposed to fix this weren't guaranteed to arrive at all. Shipping lanes were war zones. U-boats prowled beneath supply convoys. Trains carrying aid packages were rerouted, delayed, sometimes lost for months at a time. Corrupt camp officials skimmed contents before prisoners ever saw the boxes. Some camps received nothing for 6 months straight. Men waited by the gates on delivery days and watched empty trucks roll past. The bureaucracy back in Geneva knew the system was failing. Reports piled up, committees debated logistics. But committees don't feed starving men. Someone inside the wire had to make this work, not politicians, not generals. Prisoners, every camp had one. A man the Germans dismissed as harmless, a man high command back home barely acknowledged existed. The man of confidence. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners were allowed to elect one of their own to negotiate directly with camp authorities. Most German commandants viewed this role as a formality, a token gesture to keep prisoners docile. They were wrong. In camps across occupied Europe, these elected men became something far more dangerous than soldiers. They became administrators of survival. Picture one of them. Call him Corporal Hale, a composite of the quiet organizer's history barely remembers by name. Before the war, an accountant. Unremarkable, the kind of man officers overlooked in favor of louder personalities. But accountants understand something generals don't. Systems. Hale watched his fellow prisoners die, not just from starvation, but from chaos. Fights over food. Hoarding, men eating an entire week's rations in one sitting out of desperation, then starving for the rest. He proposed something radical to his fellow POWs. Full control, full rationing, full transparency. The camp's senior officers laughed him off at first. He wasn't a warrior. He hadn't fired a shot in this war. Who was he to reorganize survival itself? But desperation breeds pragmatism. Slowly, Hale earned trust. He began negotiating directly with the German quartermaster, learning the man's schedule, his weaknesses, the exact days trucks were expected. He organized POWs into supply committees. He created a manifest system, tracking every crate, every item, down to a single chocolate bar. He was mocked as the bookkeeper by cynics in the camp. They stopped laughing within a month. Here's what almost nobody understood at the time. The Red Cross package wasn't just food. It was a weapon. Each standard American parcel weighed around 11 pounds. Inside, powdered milk, corned beef, chocolate, cigarettes, soap, sometimes a deck of cards. To the Germans guarding these men, it looked absurd. A war fought with continental armies, tanks, artillery, and here were prisoners treating cigarette cartons like currency. But Hale and men like him saw something else. Cigarettes weren't just cigarettes. They were currency for bribing guards. Soap wasn't just soap. It was barter for information. Chocolate could be traded for medical supplies smuggled in by sympathetic locals. The absurd cardboard box became an entire underground economy. Prisoners built elaborate systems most outsiders would call insane. Empty powdered milk tins were flattened and reshaped into tools, some even into crude radio components, hidden in false bottoms of biscuit boxes. Guards who initially mocked the ritual of package distribution, men lining up silently, watching every item get logged and divided, began to notice something unsettling. These prisoners weren't falling apart. They were running a functioning state, complete with rationing laws, currency, and an intelligence network. One German officer reportedly complained to his superiors that the prisoners under his watch were better organized than the Reichsbahn. He wasn't exaggerating by much. Here's where it gets interesting. Because the real power of the Red Cross package wasn't calories. It was what it represented. Every parcel proved something the German High Command desperately wanted these men to forget. The outside world hadn't abandoned them. Someone, somewhere, still counted every prisoner, still tracked every camp, still demanded accountability. For camp guards, this created a slow, creeping unease. If the Red Cross knew exactly how many packages should arrive, they'd know exactly how many were stolen. Rumors spread fast among camp staff. Word that corrupt guards skimming supplies had been reported by name to Geneva through coded messages hidden in return mail. Whether every rumor was true didn't matter. Fear did the rest. Guards who once pocketed cigarettes without a second thought started hesitating. Some camp officials, worried about war crimes tribunals they sensed were coming, began treating prisoners with unusual caution. Meanwhile, morale inside the wire transformed entirely. Starving men who once fought each other over bread crusts now shared rationed chocolate on birthdays. Men who'd lost the will to escape started planning again, because a full stomach doesn't just fuel a body, it fuels defiance. Prisoners began openly organizing sports matches, theater productions, secret newspapers, all fueled by the quiet confidence the packages provided, the knowledge that someone was watching, that surrender to despair was no longer necessary. The Germans had expected broken men. Instead, they got prisoners who behaved like they were already halfway home. Not every camp had a Hale, not every camp had organization. In the final months of the war, as Germany collapsed and supply lines disintegrated completely, prisoners were force-marched westward, away from the advancing Soviet army, through brutal winter conditions, with almost no food. These death marches killed thousands. In camps where package systems had been carefully rationed and hoarded reserves built up in advance, prisoners survived these marches by carrying hidden emergency supplies, chocolate sewn into coat linings, tins strapped beneath clothing. In camps without that discipline, where packages had been consumed immediately instead of rationed, or where corrupt officers had skimmed supplies for months, prisoners had nothing left when the marches began. Survivors' accounts describe the difference starkly. Men from well-organized camps arriving at new locations gaunt but alive, still functioning as units. Men from poorly managed camps arriving in far smaller numbers. Some columns losing a third of their strength to exposure and starvation along the way. The tragedy wasn't the absence of Red Cross parcels. Shipments, however delayed, eventually reached most camps in some form. The tragedy was arrogance. Camp officers who dismissed organized rationing as unnecessary, senior POWs who refused to cede control to men like Hale, insisting military rank alone should dictate distribution, ignoring logistics expertise entirely. Pride cost lives that planning could have saved. The war ended in May of 1945. Corporal Hale, like thousands of men who served as camp administrators, returned home to little fanfare. No medals for logistics. No parades for spreadsheets. But somewhere in occupied Poland, the guard who once smiled at starving Americans through barbed wire lived to see something he never expected. He watched broken men become an unbreakable system. He watched cardboard boxes outmaneuver an empire's cruelty. He watched prisoners rebuild dignity out of powdered milk and chocolate bars, one careful ration at a time. That truck rolling through the gate in December 1944 wasn't just delivering food, it was delivering proof that thousands of miles away, in offices and shipping yards and negotiating rooms most soldiers never saw, people were still fighting for men the world might have forgotten. To the guard who once smirked through cigarette smoke, it must have seemed impossible that a box could mean more than freedom itself, until you understood that inside it carried something no ration card ever could. Hope, rationed carefully, shared quietly, worth more than any gold the war ever promised.